What's going on, guys? Got a quick update for you guys. I wanted to just share it with you while I'm stuck in traffic. Captive audience, or rather, I'm the one who's captive in my car. But Karmelo Anthony is making the news, is making his rounds. YouTube is exploding again on the controversial Karmelo Anthony case. If you don't know what the Karmelo Anthony case is about, Karmelo Anthony is a teenager in Texas who stabbed another teenager by the name of Austin Metcalf. Both of these kids were really good students, athletes, etc. And unfortunately, Metcalf lost his life and died in his twin brother's arms. So there's this massive case that's going on right now that's dividing the country, unfortunately to say, on racial lines. And one of the things that stood out in the case is the massive amount of money that the killer, the alleged killer, that is, he is innocent till proven guilty, Karmelo Anthony, raised. He raised, as of the making of my video right now, $500,000. And now his family's asking for 1.4 to 1.5 million more dollars. This is crazy. So I think it's safe to say at this point that the family is basically grifting. I think it's pretty safe to say that. I think it's also safe to say that they probably know that their son is guilty, that he's most likely not going to survive the court processes as an innocent man. And so they're trying to make as much money as possible off of this tragedy for the rest of their family. That's the feeling that I get, ladies and gentlemen. I could be wrong, but I just don't think that they're being honest actors. So after having raised $500,000, they have raised more than enough to give their son a really good, well-financed and competent defense team. You're not spending $1 million on a case, unless of course you're a celebrity and you just want to spend $1 million on a case. So there's no reason why this family should need more money. I know when they originally made their GoFundMe, or Give Send Go rather, they were asking for legal assistance, and then they amended it and said, well, we've got to do expenses too, right? Because of the father's not working and and the mother has always been a stay-at-home mom and whatever. I get it. But even with that taken into account, $500,000 is more than enough money for them to survive, at least in the short run, and to pay their son's legal bills. I hope nobody donates to Karmelo Anthony's fund. I think people are being taken advantage of, and I just don't think that it's a good investment, okay? And I hate to say it like that, to equate somebody seeking justice as an investment, but when you really look at the facts of this case, it's quite evident that Karmelo Anthony committed a murder. It's unfortunate because nobody wants to see Karmelo Anthony go to jail. Nobody wanted to see Austin Metcalf lose his life. These were young people who actually had bright futures. This is not a situation where we look at one party and that party was known as a bully or racist, or you look at the other party and that person was known as a gangster or whatever. These students, these children, were known as good people by people who knew them well. And so now it's a tragedy that, due to an inability of one child to manage their emotions, to have learned conflict resolution, whether it's from their family or from the community at large, and hence they decided to take somebody's life over a verbal disagreement that turned, wow, can you even call somebody shoving you physical? Of course you can, but it's so minor compared to what was done in return, which was stabbing somebody in the chest. It's just, Wow. But anyway, so because one child didn't know conflict resolution and the other child maybe didn't know how to mind their business. I mean, I don't even know if I can say that, because if all of my personal belongings is in a tent, which this is the story, guys, if you don't know the story, because sometimes people pop into these, channels and they don't know what people are talking about. So the story is that they're all at a track meet. These are all football players, and many times football players also run track to, work on their endurance as well as their speed, because football is a sport of speed, believe it or not, right? So these young people are running track, and it started raining. So since it started raining, everybody is kind of like seeking shelter, and each team has their own tent set up within the stands/rafters where the team can, stay dry and also store their personal belongings. And at the time, underneath Austin Metcalf's team's tent, of which Karmelo Anthony, his team had their own tent. So keep that in mind, right? But under Austin Metcalf's team's tent, and Austin Metcalf was like the team leader and all that stuff, young people are learning how to be leaders, so they're going to make mistakes sometimes. They might take the role a little too seriously as well. Well, they had players who were there. They also had their bags, their wallets, their cell phones, the whole nine. Now, in no way am I trying to insinuate that Karmelo Anthony was attempting to steal anything from these kids. No evidence of that, okay? But this person who was not a part of their team was under their tent. Now, when I first talked about this story, I had former athletes who were adults. I had parents whose children played sports. And it was really split down the middle, which was very, very weird to me, that we couldn't get like a majority on either side. Half of the people that kind of interacted with me said that it is not uncommon for their children to go underneath other teams' tents. I found that odd, because my children play sports. At least one of my children plays sports, but the other one stopped playing sports a long time ago. But we never ever saw that happen. But people were adamant about it. Like, no, that does happen, sportsmanship and all that good stuff. So who am I to say that it doesn't happen, right? That's their experience, and you got to respect that. And then the other half said no, they're competitors. The other team is the opposing team. They're going against that team with all of the skill and the vigor that they have. It's not usual and customary for them to go, to go under each other's tents. That made a little bit more sense to me, because that's what I saw in my own personal life. And so it's kind of split, right? So I don't really know who to believe, right? Who's right? I don't know, right? So on that fateful day, it's raining, and Karmelo Anthony is underneath the tent of Austin Metcalf's team. And you know what? I'm going to give Karmelo some deference and say, well, it's raining. So maybe he's just trying to seek shelter, right? Because once again, there's no evidence that he was attempting to commit a crime underneath that tent, steal or do any larcenies or criminal mischiefs, destroy property, nothing. There's no evidence of that. So Austin Metcalf said something to him, and it's kind of in contention too, because I think I may have heard that the brother of Austin Metcalf, the twin, said something first. And then Austin took over, like being the big brother, like, nah, deal with me. I don't know. But by most accounts, everybody's reporting that Austin Metcalf is the one who accosted Karmelo first and said, hey, listen, what are you doing here? You can't be here. You need to leave. And it's at that point, according to police reports, that Karmelo Anthony says, well, I'm not going anywhere. Kind of like, touch me and see what happens. And then Austin Metcalf pushes him, and then he says, punch me and see what happens. And then Austin Metcalf kind of grabs him and is going to push him. And that's when Karmelo Anthony pulls out the blade and makes that fateful blow that ends Austin Metcalf's life. Now, I just explained that to you guys. It just perplexes me how normal people could justify self-defense in a situation like that when, regardless of whether Austin Metcalf shoved Karmelo, punched Karmelo, grabbed Karmelo, these are students who are at a track meet on school property surrounded by adults. How do you articulate that Austin Metcalf was using force that could be translated or interpreted as deadly physical force, therefore authorizing Karmelo Anthony to use deadly physical force on Austin Metcalf? I guess a lot of people don't understand how the law works. You can't just kill people because they push you or they grab you or they punch you. You have to articulate that the person is using force that could be deadly against you. So I'll give you an example where somebody who's hitting you could be killed in a state like Texas. If you're fighting someone and they get you on the ground and they start stomping you in your head and you're trying to get away from them and you're asking them to stop and they refuse to stop and you feel like you're losing consciousness and then you stab them or you shoot them, that's self-defense. The act of stomping somebody in their head can cause deadly consequences. We know this. This has been studied. This has happened. Tragedies like this have happened before, where people have gotten stomped into the concrete floor, died, experienced serious physical injury, disfigurement, the whole nine. Articulate how we can find dozens and dozens or multitudes of cases where somebody is grabbed and dies. Where somebody is shoved. That one's a little different because sometimes people will slip when they get shoved and hit the back of their head and they might pass away. That happened before. But if the person doesn't fall on the ground and hit their head and they just get shoved and they maintain their balance, how often does somebody die from a shove? How often does somebody die from a punch if they don't have any underlying physical conditions and the punch does not result in them falling on the ground and hitting their head or something vital, resulting in some very serious trauma? How often? Not often. So Karmelo would have to articulate that he had no choice but to use deadly physical force, and he had no duty to retreat based off of Texas laws because Austin made him fear that he could lose his life. Where in that interaction can you articulate that fear of possible loss of life or serious physical injury, disfigurement? Be a hard fight to win if you're on the camp, or you're in the camp rather, of Karmelo Anthony, and you're saying that what he did was justified. Amazing. I just don't think it's the case. So those are the updates. So there's another update. The case was actually shown to a grand jury, and the grand jury returned with an indictment of murder in the first degree. And this is earthquake shattering to Karmelo Anthony. He's now been charged as an adult with murder in the first degree. We knew this was going to happen. The district attorney said it all along that they were seeking that charge against Karmelo Anthony, and they would present it to a grand jury. And before I go, for those of you who don't really understand how grand juries work, it'd be like 18 to 24 people who are chosen. They sit in a room. They'll hear multiple cases at a time, but we'll just narrow it out on hearing one case. When they hear one case, they will hear witnesses. The prosecution will call in witnesses, will call in the victim, will call in experts, and have them explain to the grand jury why they believe that this case is worthy of certain charges. And it basically is your peers saying not that you're guilty, but that the charges are warranted and that a trial should happen based off of the charges that the grand jury finds a true bill on. So what occurred in Texas is that a grand jury heard the evidence from the prosecution, and they have said, we don't know if Karmelo Anthony is guilty or innocent. What we do know is that there's enough evidence to say that a crime may have been committed, and it was Karmelo Anthony that committed that crime. And the charge for the crime that Karmelo Anthony committed is murder in the first degree. It is an appropriate charge, so say we the people. It's not a district attorney making that decision on their own, although they can. District attorneys don't have to go to grand juries. It is, in fact, the people, members of the community, who have listened to the evidence and determined that those were the appropriate charges. And that's why prosecutors seek grand juries for charges. They don't need to. A district attorney, county attorney can just charge you and say, I'm charging you with first degree murder, and that's it. But in many municipalities, this is a part of their best practices. And the reason why it's a part of their best practices is because they can say the people are the ones who have charged you with this crime. It's not some politician who's trying to gain favor from, the populace and, the voter bloc or the donors or whatever. You fill in the blanks. No, it's the people. The people heard the evidence. The people came back with the charge and a true bill. So that's what happened with Karmelo Anthony. The family's trying to raise like $1.4 to $1.5 million, of which they'll probably run into the sunset. They'll probably make Karmelo take a plea deal, and this will never go to trial, and therefore they'll get to keep the vast majority of the money for themselves, right? Because it won't be used on a legal defense fund. And the other news is that Karmelo Anthony was indicted. So I'll see you guys on the next one. You guys have a great day. Thanks for rocking out with me while I'm stuck in traffic. Strategic is out of here. Peace.